a quick little intro. Hey guys, this is James Newbury from Phyba Performance. Today we have the pleasure of chatting with Brad. Brad is a food scientist, but I'm going to let him do the intros for himself. This is episode 36 of the Phyba Performance podcast, talking all things flavors. I know this is a huge topic and we get asked this all the time through socials, emails, in-person events. What are flavors? Where do they come from? And there's a multitude of different flavors that are out there and used in different various food products. And Xavi and I have been really anticipating this chat, and it's been a long time coming. We've been wanting to do this episode since about episode number 5. So Brad, thanks for jumping on.
No problems. Well, actually, you've picked the topic. We could go on for days, actually. It's actually a massive topic. It's highly technical. It's also really quite simple, and actually it's all part of life, to be honest. Flavor is in every part of our sort of life, from morning breakfast to coffee to dinner at night, or sweets and confectionery. So look, a bit of my background. I started studying as a chemical engineer, realized that probably wasn't going to be my thing very quickly, and I actually went and did a full chef's apprenticeship. So I had a really good culinary background. I realized then nights weren't for me either. And I went back to university and studied food science and process engineering and food technology. And after 11 years in the university and now 30 years in the industry, I've got a pretty good background in sort of flavor development, culinary development, and have worked on lots and lots of products over the 30 years. So, so I'm not a flavorist. There are specialists who actually create the flavors. We do more of the application technology. So we actually create the products that the flavors are added to. So
that's cool.
Yeah.
And anything in particular that you like to work on? Is it solid food, or is it liquid, or is it RTDs? Like, what's your main implementation, or is it all of the above?
Look, it's really based on customer need. I mean, probably 20 years ago, we'd mostly be doing meal products and supplements and things like that, where we'd have to actually mask flavors and the whole lot. Beverage has become very large. Everybody wants to be a beverage entrepreneur. So probably more than 50% of our work is in beverage, functional beverages, energy drinks, natural brewed beverages, alcoholic. We've done a lot of alcohol over the last probably 3 years, COVID, a lot.
Yeah. Seltzers and alike?
Lots of seltzers, yeah.
Can imagine. It's very interesting because Xavi and I have some friends in the industry that are doing anything from, say, pre-workout canned RTDs to the likes of flavored seltzers and again functional beverages, milks. And there have been a couple of things that we've recently seen come out, and I actually have them myself. It's like I can't remember the company that actually makes it, but it's like an oat milk RTD in almost like a miniature long life milk container, but it's got like 20 grams of protein. But I'm sure when you're adding protein and you have to mask flavors, you're kind of dealing with really thick, harsh flavors to mask things like, pea protein and hemp protein, things that don't typically taste so nice. So what's it like trying to figure out solutions for that? Is there a process or a formula for trying to mask particular flavors, whether they're, plant-based or not?
Well, look, there is. And maybe we should go back to the very, very beginning. and actually sort of talk a little bit about flavors, where they come from, what they are, why we need them. And then we can talk about, because it'll make much more sense when we talk about what we were doing to mask flavors and why certain flavors are not acceptable or we are considered a bit abhorrent.
Right.
And I think the interesting thing is, look, flavors have been around forever. And if we want to talk about the evolutionary reason for flavor, it's really, really quickly, the reason that we taste and smell and get pleasure from flavor is because it actually gives us an environmental and an evolutionary advantage. So if you've ever had a bad night on bourbon, you know that when you go to smell it again, you are really feeling like vomiting. It's it's a reaction you cannot stop. And the reason being is because things that make you sick, we shouldn't have. So from an evolutionary point of view, flavors that are off or bitter or toxic tasting actually will elicit that response, make you want to not have them. So you can imagine from, poisonous plants and things like alkaloids, like, believe it or not, caffeine, which is actually toxic, actually the body wants to reject because it's actually potentially toxic and potentially dangerous. So from an evolutionary standpoint, those things that are pleasurable, make us eat diverse products. Fruit, for instance, we are one of the organisms that can't produce vitamin C. So we want to look out for those sweet and fruity flavors. And that actually biologically drives us to actually eat the right types of products. So you can imagine, that flavor in particular is really highly tied to, our biology, but also to our memory. So memory of a night on bourbon will stay there for a while. So
it's funny you say that, because I remember having, particular things as a kid when I was, maybe 8 or 9 years old, and the and I, didn't end well. Like it, made me vomit. It could be a particular smell of a lolly or a flavor of a lolly, and I smell it again 10 years later, and I think, oh, I can't do that. I don't know why, but that does not sit well with me. And then I'm just like, I think it's something that I had as a kid that I didn't really like, and maybe it caused me to vomit, maybe at a show or an event or something, and I ate too many lollies of a particular flavor, and it's kind of like stuck with me, and it didn't make me want to have it again.
Look, it's very true, because the sensory cortex, which is right behind the memory, is very highly sort of integrated. So the thing is that you can smell your grandma's, cooking, and it brings back pleasurable, feelings and emotions, because it's so heavily tied to that part of your brain. So look, as I said, now we sort of talk about why is it important to mask particular flavors, because, hey, bitter and off notes, notes that are not pleasurable, are going to drive people away from your product. So yeah, sometimes plant-based, products that we were talking about previously, they're earthy, they're musty, they're dirty, especially the proteins themselves. They're not particularly great on their own. When they're integrated within food, like if it's inside a fava bean or lupin, they're well masked because they're in the food. But when we isolate them to add them to other things, sometimes they don't taste great. So there is that challenge to overcome those bitter notes, and we can with flavor chemistry, and often, believe it or not, the simplest thing is a little bit of salt. It's a flavor.
Yeah. Interesting. I thought it brung out flavor more as like a flavor enhancer, right?
It does, but it also enhances good flavors and helps block bitter flavors.
Wow. Okay, cool. I didn't know that. Well, there you go.
Little tricks. We do have much more complicated sort of tools in the toolbox for bitter, and we've got things called bitterness blockers and flavor enhancers that actually reduce the flavor of bitter notes. But sometimes it's not that complicated.
Interesting. Yeah. And I think probably the common question, and we can maybe start with this, is what types of flavors are there? And I know you mentioned a few things before the podcast in terms of natural flavors, synthetic and artificial flavors, aromatic oils, and then natural flavors or artificial flavors that are identical to natural flavors, and there's essentially no difference. Can you give us a bit of a lowdown on what flavors are there?
Yeah, sure. Look, so I think historically, flavors came from things like spices and and things like vanilla pods and believe it or not, I'm sure you've seen plenty of bloggers about beaver butt. Your candy contains beaver butt.
Yeah.
So musk is a perfect example of a natural flavoring. So musk used to come from a gland in a musk deer from Central Asia. And if you're in the Americas, it actually came from beaver butt. No, it's a gland on the base of their tail, and they use it for marking their territory, right? So it's a sweet, musky, and they use it for perfumes and for food flavoring. So like musk sticks. But we don't use it anymore because it's very expensive and very hard to get hold of. And there's ethical reasons. You're not going around now harvesting, beaver butt for musk sticks. But look, these natural flavor compounds, have been around for hundreds and thousands of years. The Middle East is a perfect example. Indonesia, the navies were very much focused on that sort of trade in the Middle Ages to actually go and get spices, because hey, English food was pretty bland, meat and potatoes. So these new flavors actually really enhance the pleasure in food, and this was the natural sort of food flavorings. But as we sort of got to the Industrial Revolution, chemistry was sort of evolving, and we realized, hey, some of these compounds we can actually make. So we made some simple compounds originally, like diacetyl. Right now, it sounds very chemical, but it's a naturally occurring compound in butter. Makes it smell and taste like butter. Yep. So diacetyl was used to make butter, artificial butter popcorn flavoring. So, ethyl propionates, they're fruity, and we had all sort of different chemicals that we could create, very simple chemicals early on, some menthols and mint flavors and things like that. But realistically, they were pretty simple. When you look at natural flavors, as we've gone into the sort of 20th century and 21st century, consumers are a little bit more critical about the food they eat. So those artificials are kind of mostly off the market, and more natural flavors. So when you look at natural flavors, some of the things that people might not realize is that a natural flavor is a natural flavor, but not necessarily a natural flavor. The reason we say that is there's a thing called an extract, which you might get strawberry extract or you might get pear extract, and that comes directly from the actual fruit. So we'd call it from the name fruit, so an FTNF. So from the name fruit. So the strawberry flavor or aroma comes naturally from that, and that's recovered usually from cooking or from processing a concentrate. For instance, we would take the aroma from the vapor that comes from the cooking process. So that would be what we would consider a from the name fruit flavor. So exactly only from, say, strawberries. However, what a lot of people probably don't realize is that a natural flavor may not have any of the fruit that it's named for at all. So we would extract components from other fruits and vegetables and herbs and plant material and then recombine them to actually make that flavor. Flavors are really quite complex. You can imagine some products have, so like a banana could have 5 or 6 or 8 or 10, some very complicated fruits could have 30, 40, 50, 100 flavoring compounds, that actually give you the overall flavor. So when we talk about a natural flavor, we build the flavor to mimic exactly the compounds, the flavoring compounds in the natural fruit, whether it's a strawberry or banana or a pear. But it doesn't mean that they came from the banana or pear or strawberry. They could come, for instance, we can make vanilla from turmeric.
Yeah.
You can extract ethyl vanilla from turmeric. So
interesting. I actually have heard this before, especially from strawberries. Like the strawberry flavor that you get actually shares a ton of comparison to that of a raspberry, but say 60%, or give it just a random number, 60% of the flavor is exactly identical, and then the other 70 notes of the strawberry are made up in different compounds, and you can adjust them and take them from different herbs, spices, fruits, leaves, barks, and put them together and generate the flavor that you're looking for. The process to do something like that, obviously quite maybe technical and simple at the same time. When you're looking at the flavor, how do you kind of determine? Is it just like a chemical readout that you can, because everything's made of chemicals, right? Now, and this is probably one thing the audience may not know, that when they see chemicals, they think bad, but at the end of the day, all natural fruit that you pick from a tree and all herbs that you get from the ground, they're all filled with naturally occurring chemicals, and they can be reproduced and essentially be the identical thing inside the body, whether they come from that or not from that. Correct.
So I mean, it's interesting because there is a little bit of chemophobia at the moment, being pushed around, and the interesting thing is that the body doesn't differentiate between an aroma chemical that came from a strawberry to the raspberry, and if we've extracted it, and natural flavors are actually natural. Yes, we'd use methods to actually isolate them. But a lot of those are actually physical, or we might be using something like ethanol, and we can talk a little bit later about the sort of new modern technology that we use. But basically, you're right. We use a thing called a GC-MS, or a gas chromatograph, mass spectrometer, big word, or high performance liquid chromatography. But basically, what that does is gives us a readout of all the chemicals, the volatile chemicals that we would find in, say, strawberry. So then we go, oh, okay, we can see some methyl vanillin, we can see some propionates, and we can see some aldehydes, and we can then basically say, yep, look, we know exactly what those compounds are. Then we basically recombine them, and we have the strawberry flavor. So that is, and they, as I said, we can do that artificially, synthetically. So we can use compounds which are made in a lab, or we can use those compounds which are extracted from fruits and vegetables and plants. So that's practically the difference. So there used to be a flavor sort of, let's say, determination of on labels that said nature identical. We no longer use that. They're either natural or they're synthetic. So all NIs were synthetic flavors. They just mimicked perfectly the flavor profile and the compounds within the fruit or vegetable, whatever you're trying to mimic, exactly. So that's where the word nature identical came from. It contained all the flavor compounds that naturally occurred. Wasn't that it was actually natural.
Yeah, and I think for some of the listeners, this concept of natural flavors also being a little bit taboo with some of the social streams that come out and around that information may not be so accurate. But for kind of a broader scope understanding, could you define the difference between a natural flavor and a synthetic flavor, and how the processes to create those two differ?
Well, look, realistically, the processes aren't that much different. It's actually the raw materials. So as I said, we might actually extract sort of aldehydes from flowers. We might, which are they're what we call VOCs, or volatile organic chemicals. So they're aromas, and we can talk a little bit about how the body actually interprets, flavor and aroma, and how it recombines it and the whole lot, so you can sort of really understand. But realistically, there is no difference between these chemicals, right? So the interesting thing is there will be lots of people tell you that but if coming from natural, they've got different, hertz vibrations and weird sort of things. It just doesn't exist. The fact is these chemicals are not unsafe. We've been eating them for hundreds of thousands of years naturally, and just because they've been extracted either from a natural source or from a synthetic source doesn't change the actual way the chemical works within the body. So it's just it's nonsense to say that they're more dangerous, or that an organic flavor is better than a non-organic flavor, or anything like that. So I mean, basically, the difference between the two is twofold. When we're talking about building a flavor, is the source. But there are other methods, and we use things like supercritical CO2, which is like a really low temperature, high pressure carbon dioxide in a liquid, and we use it as a solvent to pull flavors out of things like curry leaves and mint, and we get a beautiful extract that is really true to character, very expensive, but a great flavoring. We use them now. These processes are physical processes to, we use vacuum distillation, so heating and removing the aromas. We use ethanol extraction, alcohol to pull out the flavors. So, all these processes are very natural in their form. And, as I said, they're mostly physical processes, and they can actually also create really great natural flavors. I've got some fantastic ones that are essential oils. They're basically just extracts of the oils from orange, mandarin, bergamot, orange. These are fantastic flavors. So when you get to a bubblegum flavor, it's kind of, we don't extract it from, Hubba Bubba down the road. It's created in a lab. It's right. Many of them taste more like banana than bubblegum, because bubblegum doesn't exist in nature. It's just really a flavor,
Well, that was actually one of my questions coming up. Is there are some flavors that people have now, done very well with in particular products, whether it's bubblegum or drinks or candy or of some description. Are there any particular flavors that sit at like the top of the list when people are looking to get in contact with you to create a product that actually don't essentially come from nature, but is a combination of a new flavor that is not really found in nature, but is an absolute hit with everyone that, you know, people are asking for a lot? Or is it a combination of a few different things that have been derived from nature, then just given a different name?
Look, it's a hard one, because look, flavor complexity is a great way to protect your brand, you know. So you build flavors that are, you know, not just one. So for instance, you might build a tropical flavor, and you might build, you know, some banana, passion fruit, some pineapple on top of that, but you might throw in something really weird like a hibiscus note, which gives it sort of some astringency and acidity, and you don't put it on the label, but it's actually adding something very different and something sort of that it makes it characteristic of your product. If we looked at standard products, let's look at protein drinks. If you don't do chocolate, vanilla, strawberry, coffee, you probably never sell a product, right? So maybe banana as well. But there's certain products which are really, and I think milk drinks is a perfect example, where the flavors are pretty much set in concrete and the rest are fringe. You know, when it comes to, you know, drinks, we see the sort of fruity flavors, lime, lemon. We see sort of, I guess, you know, watermelon. We see that's sort of been quite, you know, recently very popular. But you see, you know, some more Asian fusion ones. You see some soursop, and you see, you know, lychee and yuzu coming through. But look, realistically, the flavors now, you know, it's about personal preference, and we just see these shift and ebb as, you know, as the years go by, and what consumer preferences are, and exposure to different sort of, I guess, parts of the world. So as I said, soursop, you know, most people don't even know what that is still, but it's starting to grow.
Yeah, that's so interesting. And one other flavor that has actually kind of come about more recently that we never really took notice of before, that people are asking for, is pistachio. And I don't know where it's come from or how it's been brought to life, but pistachio was one of them. And there was a unique flavor out of Asia that people were asking for as well. I can't remember the name off the top of my head, but I'll have to hit you up after. Sorry, what was it?
Could be calamansi.
It might actually be. It might actually be that.
A little orange.
Yeah, that's the one. Yeah, it is. Yeah, that's the one.
Yeah. It is becoming more popular as well, but you'll see some sort of fusions now, you know, branding, like you know, lots of protein powders and drinks, Biscoff flavored or violet crumble, or, you know, they're identifiable, that people are, you know, are quite, I guess, now sort of a part of their normal diet. So there's sort of, one of the things that people have, they have a bit of hesitance to taste something that they, you know, they may not like. And it goes back to the reason, because if you don't like it, you kind of wasted all your money. And if anyone has bought protein powders, you know, $35 worth of stuff you're not going to eat.
Yeah. And just out of curiosity, off the top of your head, if you know what it is, you know, we get asked that question a lot. You know, what are the main flavor notes that you get in Biscoff? Like, what is, I just like vanilla biscuit or something like that. I'm not really sure how it's made, but have you got any idea on what type of main flavors are sitting in that from nature?
Yeah, it's look, the fact is it's a very high sugar caramelized. So there's biscuit, there's that slightly buttery, there's, you know, there's that toasted notes in there, definitely caramel, which is from that sugar, and I guess there's that sort of cakiness in there, which is typical of a biscuit. So, you know, you can say it's baked sort of aroma, which, you know, they're all really sort of pleasant flavors. So I can see why people want it in everything.
Yeah.
You know, they're all those flavors that we like.
Yeah, totally. And I guess probably one thing that our community or audience would ask us is, when we extract a natural, say, aroma oil from, you know, either an orange or a mandarin, like you said, or it's made in the lab, are there any things that differentiate in terms of what they're coming into the product with? So if we were to make those, let's just say we were to extract some notes from those, you know, banana or mandarin, and then we were to create it in the lab sense, the process at which it's created, are there any byproducts in that process that are then brought into the product themselves? So are they being attached with anything that is considered, like we said, they're not harmful, but would be perceived as harmful? Does that make sense?
It really depends. I mean, we don't tend to use benzenes or any of those sort of solvents now for flavors, because that actually immediately nowadays would actually deem it an artificial, because the definition of natural or a nature product is very difficult, because nothing's natural really, because we all, like, even the plants that we grow are not natural. We've hybridized them. They're farmed. So if we kind of call it natural, it's a bit hard to sort of define. But what a consumer probably thinks of natural, it doesn't contain anything that we wouldn't expect to be there. Now, that's a really difficult question, because, what do you expect to be there? So, for instance, we use solvents like ethanol, and we might use a solvent like propylene glycol, and that sounds like something you'd put in your car. Yeah. So the thing is, these are grass, or what we call generally recognized as safe. They've been consumed for a long time, and regardless of what people say, the life expectancy of humans is increasing every year. We're not all dying. We're not all dropping off from cancer. The fact is, cancer is a unfortunate disease of old people, and the older we get, the more likely we are to get cancer. So, and we are growing older, and to be honest, the 40s is the 20s, and the 60s is really our 40s, and we're healthier than we've always ever been, regardless of what people sort of think.
And I guess this is probably, and I'm not even sure if it's classed as a flavor, but it does have some flavor additive or some flavor linkage. Is I get asked this question a lot when citric acid is used in products, and I get asked the question that comes through the emails is like, citric acid, how's it produced? And then you get the black mold and then everything else. I'm just like, hey, we're not putting mold in anything. If there's citric acid in there, et cetera, et cetera. Do you get asked that question from time to time of like the generation of that?
We do. And look, it's difficult, because food science is really, it's unusual. When I get told, when I tell someone I'm a food scientist, they look at you like, what do you do? I mean, it's not like a plumber or electrician that you see every day. I mean, we're kind of hidden in a lab somewhere, or in a factory, and a lot of us, don't talk a lot. We don't say much to our friends and colleagues, let alone our family. So there's a lack of education about what we actually do. So if we have a look at something like citric acid, if we extracted it from lemons or fruit, we just wouldn't have enough lemons, or oranges on the planet to make the amount of citric acid. Because it's added to drinks, and it's added to confectionery. It's a flavor enhancer. It's an acidity, regulator. It's great for antimicrobial. It's very, very safe. But we need to work out, how do we make this in large quantities? And look, aspergillus are great at making citric acid. So the thing is, when we actually grow what we call biomass and then extract the what we call metabolic byproducts of metabolism, so basically what they leave behind when they've actually eaten, the substrate, and usually it's the starch, or it might be a protein and starch, we harvest that, we isolate it, and we use that citric acid. It's identical chemically to that that's found in a lemon or an orange. But we were able to produce it in large amounts at $5 a kilo. Well, it's probably a bit more expensive now, but
it's more sustainable, right? It's more sustainable, and it's not putting as much load on the environment at the same time, because to get the same quantity, you're going to have to pillage an entire area of fruits and oranges and everything else in between to try and get one product done, right? So it makes sense.
I mean, look, to be honest, the world of bio sort of mass technology is growing. So bioreactors to produce everything from milk proteins to enzymes for production, to things like citric acid and ascorbic acid and vitamins and pharmaceuticals. So it's a way of life. I mean, we've got a lot of people on the planet and not a lot of space.
Yeah, exactly. It's so interesting, because one thing that I'd always thought about as well, creating products, is that there are some maybe it comes from, maybe the 50s and 60s and 70s when, flavors started to come really into the limelight, and television became more available to everyone, and then marketing and promotion became more available, and then cereal started becoming very popular. But like you said, we get vanilla, we get chocolate, we get strawberry, we get some banana, and maybe you do a coffee. I find it interesting that people really stick to the strawberry milk and, the chocolate milk, but they never typically go down the path of like a blueberry milk or a raspberry milk. Why is it stuck with strawberry and it never really ventured out past that, or a mango milk? It's really weird how we've grown to only appreciate a few of so many different variant flavors. And I'm not sure why that could be the case. Is there anything that you've seen over the years that have really dialed into, sticking with the strawberry vanilla chocolate? Was that like a ploy from some company, or are those flavors just really, really nice to the taste as a human?
Well, look, to be honest, I mean, realistically, that doesn't happen in Asia. Right. Firstly, a lot of them are lactose intolerant, but secondly, that's just not typically what they're exposed to as children. So we are exposed to these flavor profiles as kids, and they're pleasurable. We have a memory of them of being really pleasurable. So we don't necessarily go and search them out, but we know these are flavors that we like, right? So we will try Biscoff and caramel and the whole lot, but realistically, it's kind of reliable. But if you're in Asia, something like a red bean, in particular Japan, a red bean soy milk, would be quite typical. And for them, strawberry could be abhorrent. Like, it could be a terrible flavor, and they think it tastes weird and artificial. So it's about perception and reality and what you're exposed to as a child. I mean, you look in let's say Indonesia, they don't drink juice. 5% of people drink orange juice in the morning. It's a bit more of a Western thing, whereas, drinking tea is more typical, or just drinking water or some other infused, product. So it's all about perception, and what you're used to. So yes, in Western culture, strawberry, chocolate, and vanilla, but you'll find that that'll be very, very different everywhere around the world. And it's more about exposure and what you're used to on a regular basis. It sort of, I guess, gives you bias on your choices.
Yeah, interesting. And I'm sure you probably deal with this a lot of the time too. But sweeteners, like what are some types of sweeteners that are best used in practice in terms of getting, the fullest flavor out of the product without being either too expensive or, too harsh, or leaving that bitter taste at the end, that end note that you get, which you typically hear you maybe get more so with like a monk fruit or a stevia or, something in between. But I'm sure there's probably the latest food science out there that are coming up with better ways to sweeten products that, again, don't leave people upset. Because something that actually popped up probably about 12 months ago with some sweeteners would give some people, either upset stomach or maybe a bit of a headache or whatever it may be. Maybe give us a bit of a lowdown on sweeteners and how you like to use them.
Yeah, look, it's almost MSG all over again, to be honest.
Yeah, okay.
MSG is a perfect example of being demonized as as an ingredient, which causes everything. It's the bad boy. It causes brain, hyperactivity and cancer, and it's just the facts are, it's the most tested and studied food ingredient in the world. And we could go into it in another blog about where this actually came from, and unfortunately, it's actually got some fairly ordinary and potentially racist reasons for being against MSG. But the thing is that it's glutamic acid. It's a naturally occurring amino acid with salt. It's actually, there's glutamates in breast milk, in cheese, in tomatoes, in mushrooms. Those who are allergic apparently to MSG would die because their bodies are full of, it's the most prevalent amino acid in the body. So, I mean, it's a perfect example that, we demonize ingredients on a regular basis, not necessarily because of facts. So if we go and have a look at, sweeteners, for instance, so there's a bit of a conundrum with in what we call intense sweeteners, because the artificials taste natural and the naturals taste artificial. The The naturals are much more difficult to work with. So the monk fruits, the stevias, the thaumatins, with polyols as well. So, like erythritol or xylitol, they're much more difficult to work with than something like sucralose. Sucralose is a fantastic mimic of sugar. It's practically the same profile, and it's definitely artificial, but it's really easy to work with because it doesn't have any off notes. It's not bitter. It tastes like sugar and easy to work with within a beverage or in a food product. So consumers don't want it, so we work down the path of using natural fruit extracts. So things like glycosides, which come out of fruit, they might come out of a monk fruit, or they might come out of, we've got steviosides out of stevia plant. You've got sort of citrus glycosides out of, bitter oranges. These are intensely sweet, and the body sees them as, when we taste it, we see them as intensely sweet. So they're really good replacing sugar. Unfortunately, they're also very peaky, and that's where you say that you get that intense sweetness and it then hangs, and that's not how sugar performs. So we tend to use polyols with them, so like erythritol or xylitol, or maybe a little bit of glycerol, depending on the application, to try and smooth out that the intensity of the sweetness. So it's hard because we have to also mask some of the cooling effect that we get, and we have to try and mask some of the sometimes bitter notes you get from those glycosides, in particular stevia. So, and they taste a little bit licoricey sometimes, and in some applications they just don't work. So it's a little bit of a double-edged sword, clean label, but difficult sensory profile.
That totally makes sense. Sense.
It feels like not only the process of extraction, but flavoring and putting together a final product is both a blend of science and art. I'm sure there's a lot of finesse and experience that comes into creating something that is going to be palatable to the customer, but also represents like the integrity of the process that you've gone through to create that. So can you speak to that a little bit? How much artistry do you bring to the process? And I'm sure over the years you've refined it quite a bit, but can you speak to us about that process a little bit?
Well, you'd see a normal food manufacturer would usually include not only sort of development scientists and food scientists and food engineers, but they would have culinary experts like chefs and cooks, within that, because, realistically, that the development of flavor is not just about adding flavor. Often, there's a misconception. We often don't just add flavor. We add flavor to maybe a beverage that has no fruit. If we're making a lemonade, we're adding flavor here. But if we're looking at something like a meal product, we might be adding, a umami flavor, which is basically, it could be a yeast extract to improve the flavor that we can't develop in the factory. Because yes, factories are big kitchens, but it's very hard to braise and it's very hard to caramelize and develop some of those flavors. All cooking, we don't generally cook for 6 or 8 hours as you might, in a crock pot or in a pressure cooker, cooking under pressure for an hour and a half. We just don't do those sort of things very often in factories. They're expensive, and if someone wants their ready meal for $6 at the supermarket, it's very, very hard for us to do that. With that standard cooking process. So we're boosting the flavors. We're improving those flavors that we can't develop by using something that already has those flavor notes. So we might add a roasted flavor to improve that flavor because we're running it through the process a little bit too quick to develop the exact same amount of flavor. So we also might add aroma because people like to open their cheese twisties and smell cheese, they not just taste it. And look, the human body is pretty amazing, actually. It's when we eat let's take the cheese twisty, for instance. When we eat it, it's just not about flavor. We taste the sort of 5 tastes. We taste those salty, acid, bitter, umami, so that sort of meaty, savory notes immediately on the tongue, and the rest goes up into the sinus cavity, into the olfactory nerves, and the brain immediately combines those, including things like the texture and how it bites and how it feels on the tongue. All those things all meld together in the brain to form the flavor. So flavor's not just what we add as a compound. It's really about the whole product and how it actually performs when you actually drink it or eat it. So it's pretty complicated.
It's fascinating. And again, like Xavi just said, it's an art form, because you are combining not just the flavor of a pear or a strawberry. It's the texture, the smell, the action, the feeling. It's super interesting. And I think this will probably open up a lot of people's eyes when, you know, they're tasting their next meal, or they're chewing into their next protein bar or whatever it may be. They'll probably think about it a little bit more. It's like, okay, why am I enjoying this so much? Because I know if I have, you know, for instance, the pea snaps, the dried pea snaps that you get from local shop. You know, I'll start by having one at a time, and by the end of the packet, I'm having 4 at a time, and I'm just like, I need more and more and more and more, and it's the combination of the texture as well and the flavor, and it's almost like it's just inviting you to have more. So, which is very fascinating, and I think this has probably opened up a lot of people's eyes about what flavors are, where they come from, and probably brought down a few barriers. Like you mentioned before, what you do is typically you're in a lab or you're in a factory and you're creating a food product, and you're not really talking about it a lot. And I scoured the web to try and find a podcast where someone actually did a deep dive into flavors with someone like you, a food engineer, that spoke about flavors, what they are and where they progressed from, where they came from, and what we're doing now, and maybe why they've been demonized over time, and to maybe, you know, shed some light on what you've been doing. And, you know, honestly, it's been an absolute blast to learn or take a deep dive into flavors, natural flavors and artificial flavors and everything in between. So I really appreciate the time, Bradley. This has been absolutely amazing. We probably have to get you on to talk about it more.
Well, look, we can talk about actually the process, actually designing a product and getting it into a factory and to market, if you'd like to.
Yeah, absolutely. That's for sure. Like we're probably bringing these podcasts out once a week to once a fortnight. So this is like, we can do a whole topic on how to develop a food and how to create it. And I'm sure, especially people within our listener base, they're doing things like bars and RTDs and doing, proteins and pre-workouts and you know, everything in between. And a lot of them are looking even to the idea of electrolytes. Like, how do you get your electrolytes flavored properly, like especially when they're so salty, you know, when you've got 800 to 1,000 milligrams of sodium, how do you flavor that nicely without it being too hard on salt? Things like that. So
exactly. So it's something we do every day. So happy to chat about it at any time.
Fantastic. Oh, we'll have to have you back on in the next few weeks. Sounds great. Bradley, thank you so much. We really appreciate it. And thanks for spending some time and just, sharing your knowledge.
No problems.
Great. Bradley, thank you so much. Thanks, guys. Really appreciate you guys listening. And if you guys have any more questions for Bradley, make sure you send them on through, and we'll get them over to Brad. We'll get them answered and get them straight back to you. And we'll have Brad back on again soon to talk about how to put together products. Thank you.
Fantastic.
Thanks, Bradley.